wrote My Tears Ricochet for this film.
Right.
Why is that song so pivotal?
I mean, honestly, her writing is so incredible that you could put any one of her songs and be like, this is perfect.
Yeah.
This is the most. I think that, this is a moment in the story where Lily is having something has happened in her life that's going to change the course of her life, whatever decision she makes. And she's never felt more. And the stakes aren't just for her. They're bigger than her.
What if a Hollywood star's lawsuit could land her in hot water with the IRS? That's exactly what Blake Lively might be facing right now. Hey everyone, welcome back. There are two things in life you can always count on: death and taxes. And for Blake Lively, taxes are the problem that could come back to bite her. Here's the catch. If she wins this lawsuit and somehow the court declares her an employee of Wayfair Studios and it ends with Us Movie LLC, she could be in serious trouble. Huge trouble. Why? Because Blake Lively worked through a loan-out company. The payments she got from It Ends With Us were as a contractor, reported on a 1099. She never received a W-2. When she filed her taxes, she did so as Blake Incorporated, her business, not as Blake Lively, the individual. But now, in her federal lawsuit in New York, she's asking the court to recognize her as an employee. That's a major red flag. If she actually wins, any verdict or settlement would become a public record, essentially stating that the money she received counts as wages or damages for employment issues. Her lawsuit is asking for employment-related damages, but there's a huge problem here. If she's granted that, it could trigger an IRS investigation for tax fraud. So, who are her attorneys, and why did they file this case in the first place? Let's break this down. We've talked about how frivolous the lawsuit seems, and how Blake's claims appear weak. We've also touched on the fact that she hasn't exhausted all her administrative options, even though she claims she has. Now, let's get to the basics of her contract. In her responses to the summary judgment, Blake admits she received escrow money, which was deposited into an account at WME under Blake Inc. Blake Incorporated is her registered business, and Blake Lively is the registered agent and manager. In other words, she's the CEO. When she worked on It Ends With Us, she wasn't working as Blake Lively, the individual. She was working as a business. And that distinction is key because it allowed her to write off many expenses against the income she earned from the film. While she was on set, none of her state taxes, federal taxes, or other contributions, like FICA, Social Security, or Medicare, were withheld by Wayfair. The only deduction was the required sales tax in New Jersey for the fee. It was entirely her responsibility to pay the taxes later that year to the IRS and the state, either through her annual filing or via quarterly payments. While Blake was on set, she had the unique advantage of running almost all her work-related expenses through her business, which helped her significantly reduce her tax liability on the $1.75 million she earned. To lower the amount owed to the federal and state governments, she could write off management fees, publicist fees, nanny fees, transportation costs, meals, lodging, basically any necessary expense tied to her work. Even legal fees could be deducted. Anything and anyone she hired as part of her work on the film could be funneled through her company, Blake Incorporated, and treated as a legitimate business deduction. These deductions directly reduce her taxable income, which is how she minimized her tax burden. Essentially, Blake was operating as a business owner on set. This allowed her to run multiple expenses through her company, legally reducing the amount she owed the government. This is something employees simply don't get to do. As an employee, you receive a salary from your employer. That employer deducts all the relevant taxes for you, federal, state, Social Security, Medicare, and at the end of the year, they provide you with a W-2 showing exactly how much was taken out. If you participate in things like a 401k or other benefits, all of that is listed there as well. Employees don't have the luxury of deducting business expenses to reduce their tax liability because they are working for someone else, not themselves. But independent contractors with a registered company, like Blake, can legally do this. This distinction is central to Wayfair's argument in their summary judgment motion. They emphasized that Blake was not an employee and highlighted the tax implications. They pointed out, "We did not pay her taxes. We did not provide any insurance. We did not offer benefits. She received a 1099 at the end of the year. Her company, Blake Incorporated, received an escrow check, which was deposited on X date. If Blake were to win a verdict in her favor, that ruling would become a public record, and that record would effectively say she was awarded damages for an employment dispute. Here's the problem. She is seeking extra money for employment purposes, yet she has already claimed herself as a business owner for tax purposes. If the IRS were to see this contradiction, it could be considered a strong indication of fraud. The IRS and the Department of Labor work closely to identify cases where workers are misclassified. In Blake's case, a high-profile lawsuit that reclassifies her as an employee could trigger an immediate audit. To claim substantial damages, Blake would need to prove her economic losses. This requires scrutinizing her income and expenses, which the defense is already doing. As a result, all of her financial records and any inconsistencies are now under the microscope. So if she's already written off expenses as a business owner and now claims she was an employee, that's a serious legal and financial conflict. Once her taxes are filed, she cannot legally switch classifications without potentially triggering major consequences. By claiming damages as an employee, Blake would essentially be admitting that the deductions she previously took as a contractor, deductions approved and accepted by the IRS, were actually improper. If that's the case, she could lose her legal footing to justify those deductions and might face serious consequences, including back taxes, interest, and fraud penalties that could reach up to 75% of what she didn't pay. Her taxes could turn into a complete nightmare. And it's not just about civil penalties. She could also face criminal charges. She wouldn't be the first celebrity to face this. Remember Wesley Snipes? He went down for tax fraud and tax evasion. Blake wouldn't be the first actor to stumble over similar charges. This is exactly why abusing the tax system in this way is so risky. By using her business to gain deductions, and then trying to claim the benefits of being an employee while seeking damages for employment, she's essentially double-dipping. At this point, she's either misrepresenting her status to the IRS or misrepresenting it to the court. That mismatch alone can trigger a criminal investigation. And here's the truth. The tax authorities rarely let cases like this slide. Tax law is one of the few tools that almost guarantees accountability, no matter how high-profile someone is. Think about it. Al Capone, the notorious gangster, was ultimately brought down by tax charges. It's a tried-and-true method for the feds. Taxes must be paid. It's the law. No one can legally evade them. If her lawsuit ends up proving that she willfully misled the IRS by claiming she's an employee after filing as a contractor and business owner, she could be criminally liable. Criminal charges would require the government to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she intentionally misled them to avoid paying taxes. Here's where it gets even trickier. If she made sworn statements in her tax filings declaring herself a business owner and contractor, but then claims in court that she was an employee, those statements can be used to suggest she had intent to deceive one party or the other. If she intentionally used her loan-out company to claim deductions she knew employees wouldn't be eligible for, her lawsuit asserting employee status shows awareness of the difference between classifications, making it hard for her to argue it was an innocent mistake. And if she knowingly misrepresented her tax status, especially after winning a legal victory that confirms the opposite, prosecutors could view this as intentional deception. Federal tax felony convictions carry serious consequences, including up to 5 years in prison per account, massive fines, and the requirement to pay all back taxes. Filing a lawsuit in this way, while claiming both employee and business status, carries extreme risk of an IRS criminal investigation. I have to wonder about her attorneys. They claim to specialize in business law, so they would know that Blake is not an employee. They would also know how she filed her taxes. And yet, this lawsuit puts her directly in the IRS's spotlight. To make matters more intense, consider the political climate. Blake and Ryan are not supporters of the Republican administration, and high-profile non-Republicans have sometimes been targeted more aggressively. It seems almost reckless for her to give the IRS a reason to scrutinize her finances right now. Honestly, she's practically putting flashing neon lights on herself. It's like she's rolling out the red carpet on the tarmac, waving at the IRS and saying, "Come audit my business. Take a look at everything." And if Blake were to receive damages from Wayfair, that only makes the situation more complicated. She would be benefiting twice, first from the tax advantages of operating as a business and claiming those deductions, and second from being awarded compensation as an employee. The kicker? All of her claimed damages relate to her own businesses, not the movie itself. She isn't claiming that she lost money on the film, nor that her salary or payment from it ends with Us Movie LLC was reduced. In fact, she admits she even received bonuses tied to her contract. So if she was fully paid, including bonuses, there's no actual economic loss connected to the movie. When you look at her counterclaims and her statement of facts, her 56.1 filing, all her damages center around her personal businesses. Here's the contradiction. On one hand, she tells the court, I'm an employee. But when discussing damages, she's effectively saying, I'm a business owner. The income she reports comes from her brands, Blake Brown and Betty Boo's, which suffered losses as part of her argument. Now, think about that. Most employees don't get to go to work and simultaneously claim income losses from companies they own on the side. Those businesses have nothing to do with her role as an employee. What she's communicating through her damages is clear. She's acting as a business owner, not as an employee. And that's exactly what Wayfair highlighted in their summary judgment motion. They argued that her claimed damages are not only barred by the contract, but also not allowed under the law because her companies aren't part of the lawsuit. Essentially, she's asking for employee damages for business losses, which isn't permitted. Both of her brands are built around Blake herself, and their success depends on her being the public face. According to carefully prepared financial projections, after the backlash from this lawsuit, Blake couldn't promote these brands publicly. Negative commentary forced her to pause social media activity for both companies immediately after the film's release. Even though Blake Brown and Betty Boo's were previously successful, both brands experienced significant declines. This was caused by disruption in marketing strategies, erosion of brand equity, and a sharp drop in sales after the alleged retaliation. What she is literally telling the court is that her marketing plan for her businesses depended on leveraging the film's promotion. While promoting the movie, she wasn't just promoting a film, she was promoting herself and her businesses. That's a critical point. She wasn't acting as an employee for Wayfair at all. She had devised a strategic marketing plan with her teams to use the film as a platform to boost her business sales. She wasn't promoting the movie for the movie's benefit. Think about it. What does advertising her alcohol brand and her hair care line have to do with the movie? If she were truly an employee, this would be a huge conflict. She could risk getting fired because she's essentially competing with the film. In other words, she's using the movie to benefit her own ventures, which would not be allowed as an employee and could even raise legal concerns about intellectual property or copyright infringement. By promoting her own brands, Blake wasn't acting as an employee for Wayfair at all. Her business decisions had nothing to do with her role as an employee. She is literally telling the court, I was working as myself for myself. I'm a business owner. It's mind-blowing that the judge is even pushing for a settlement when, realistically, all they have to do is dismiss the case. Because if the court allows it to proceed and declares her an employee, she could be facing serious trouble for tax fraud. Looking at how she structured her damages, it almost seems like a shakedown. It's like she's saying, I'm going to make the people I'm upset with pay because I suffered backlash and my businesses took a hit from choices I made that had nothing to do with the film. She's openly admitting that during the promotion, she wasn't working as a Wayfair employee. She was operating as an employee of herself, her own small business. If you dig through the documents, it's clear as day what she's doing. Anyone who reads these filings can see it, yet the public has been largely misled because most people don't actually read these records. I remember Brian Friedman commenting at the start, I don't think she ever intended to take it this far. Honestly, I tend to agree. It seems Blake and Ryan have spent years using the threat of litigation to pressure others into compliance, maybe to force a sequel sale, an apology, or some kind of concession. But now, since those things aren't happening, it looks like they're trying to make people pay. And here's the kicker. In doing this, she's putting herself at extreme legal risk. If she wins, she's opening herself up to potential criminal charges, tax fraud, filing false tax returns, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit tax evasion, and even perjury. Lying under oath on tax documents or in court about your employment status is a serious crime. Blake's focus on revenge, protecting her reputation, and shifting blame has created a situation that is almost a full-blown narcissistic collapse. Very few outlets have really analyzed the tax implications of this case, and that's what makes it so fascinating and alarming. I wanted to break this all down in one video, highlighting how ludicrous these damages claims are and why this case is such a legal minefield. Now, I want to hear from you. Are you shocked? Surprised? Did you expect Blake to go this far? Do you think she'll find a way out? Or should the judge finally step in and dismiss the case? If the court allows this to proceed, Blake is essentially inviting criminal scrutiny. She's literally begging for an IRS investigation. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know what you think about this crazy situation. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this breakdown, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more inside scoops, and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. You won't believe what happens next in this case. Stay tuned, because it's about to get even crazier. Thanks so much for watching, besties. I'll see you in the next video.